Hello and welcome to Top Story. Yesterday, 10 French soldiers were killed in a Taliban ambush in Afghanistan. It was the deadliest attack on international forces since fighting began in 2001. No sooner had the deaths been confirmed than President Nicolas Sarkozy announced he would visit Afghanistan to meet the 20-plus French soldiers injured in the assault, as well as Afghan President Hamid Karzai. Earlier this year, Sarkozy made the controversial decision to send an additional battalion of French troops to the country, taking France's presence to some 3,000 soldiers. The attack happened some 50 kilometers away from the Afghan capital, Kabul. Although France had many troops stationed in the country prior to the reinforcements being sent to Afghanistan, it is relatively recently that the French have begun to take on board some of the more dangerous missions. I'm joined now in the studio by Emmanuel Reinert, Executive Director of the Senlis Council, London. Many thanks for coming on to the show. With these 10 deaths in Afghanistan, does France now realise that it's engaged in a war?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's very much new for the French public and the French audience compared to people in Canada or in the United Kingdom. Of course, those are very different. They've been reading about deadly attacks almost daily in their newspaper, and the casualties, the number of British and Canadian soldiers who had died since the beginning of the operation amounts to more than 200. So it's not new for them, but it's all new for France.
President Sarkozy's decision to send an additional 700 troops to Afghanistan was very controversial here in France. Was there a certain inevitability about the fact that there would be French casualties once more French troops were dispatched to the country?
Well, indeed, but I'm not sure that, of course, the French public and even French politicians were really aware of that. As a matter of fact, there is a global denial from the international community of the strengths of the Taliban, the extent of their control, the way they can move around the country, and the extent of the psychological control of the local population. So it's not only France, it's an international community which is not totally aware of the really deterioration of the situation in Afghanistan.
So things are getting much worse on the ground, is what you're saying, while the international community has taken its eyes away from the zone, in a sense.
Absolutely. When you have to remember the short history of this operation. In 6 or 7 years ago, in 2002, Afghanistan was a success story of the war on terror. Americans have done a wonderful job in throwing away the Taliban regime, and were seen as liberation troops by the local population. In 6 years, the picture is totally different, and now the population is remembering with nostalgia the Taliban time, because the situation has become so painful for them, both in terms of security and also economic development.
In terms of the French deaths, so there are a couple of factors at play here, one being the French taking on more dangerous missions, and the other, the Taliban insurgency growing ever stronger. Is that your analysis?
Absolutely. I think we released a report 2 months ago doing a on-spot analysis of the Taliban control of a province really near the Kabul, Vardak province on the west of Kabul, saying that the Taliban has control of this province, and therefore they were at the door of Kabul. I think this unfortunately confirms our analysis, and that the Taliban have now extended their operation from the south, where they've been waging a war against the Canadian and British troops, to the outskirts of Kabul, with this kind of a strategy of circling Kabul. And if you look at the map of the recent attack, just 15 days of attacks, they are all over Kabul, from north to south and from west to east.
So there are no safe districts anymore. It was a criticism of France from the Anglo-Saxon members of the alliance in Afghanistan that the French and the Germans as well weren't taking on board some of these more dangerous missions.
I think the French are now engaged in really more in the deep of the Afghan war, and that, of course, the Taliban have come closer to where they were. So it's a combination of the two. There are some safe zones in Afghanistan still in the north, Azar al-Sharif, where the Germans are stationed. And certainly, I think we need more troops on the ground, and we need the coalition member we are in safe zone to come to the rescue and help their colleagues in the south and now in Kabul.
Now, very recently, and before flying out to Afghanistan, President Sarkozy said that France is committed to pursuing the struggle against terrorism, for democracy and for freedom. Are you convinced that France has the political will and desire to stay in Afghanistan for the long haul?
I think that's something that will have to be determined in the next days, next weeks, because, as you said, this is all new for the French public, for the French policymakers, and they will have to make up their mind about that. I think it's very important that France is staying and reinforcing its troops in Afghanistan. I think, in a way, that the Taliban are waging two wars and two propaganda war in Afghanistan. One vis-à-vis the Afghans, and one vis-à-vis the population in the West, of course. And they're trying, of course, to discourage them for being involved in Afghanistan. But we are to stand beyond the troops and the efforts of the coalition, because it's absolutely obvious that we cannot allow Al-Qaeda and Islamism to have a base and a country at this position right in the center of Central Asia.
In terms of the changing and indeed deteriorating situation in Afghanistan, how will the resignation of Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf feed into all of this?
Well, that's a big question mark in a way, even though we can may share some thought about this. First of all, Pakistan has always been involved, or Pakistanis element involved, in the training and the resourcing of the Taliban forces on its north-east frontier. And it's true that any element which destabilizes Pakistan might reinforce the will and the power of those groups. But on the other way, any democratization of Pakistan and the associated economic development might also weaken those same groups. So we'll see how things evolve.
And in the short term, you'd expect to see French troops continue to embark on these missions to continue to put themselves in danger?
Well, if they don't put themselves in danger, the situation would put themselves in danger with the reinforcement of the Taliban ability to move around and organize attacks.
At the moment, there are about 70,000 troops, I believe, in Afghanistan. What would you consider to be the figure that's required to combat the Taliban at the moment?
I think we have to double those troops and to have a level which is more similar to the one in Iraq, to 100, 120.
Okay. Many thanks to Emmanuel Reinert for coming into the studio, Executive Director of the Senlis Council in London. We've been talking about the French presence in Afghanistan and the deaths of 10 troops yesterday in a Taliban ambush. I'll be back with another edition of Top Story at exactly the same time tomorrow on France 24. Until then, though, it's bye for now.